Okay. Now, what I want to talk about is the science shutdown. And I'm very alarmed about the science shutdown because I view this as not very scientific. And in fact, what would we do in a scientific situation if we were trying to understand where we were? One thing we would do is we would run controlled experiments. And I want to take the opportunity to talk about Daniel Shaver and Tony Timpa, who were both killed by police on video. Daniel Shaver was in a motel. I believe that he was an exterminator who had some kind of or something like that, had been spotted by the police. He was given extremely complicated instructions as to how to behave. He could not follow the directions. I think he adjusted his belt while he was being told to crawl on the floor. And as a result, he lost his life because the instructions were not possible for him to carry out without error. Had that happened to George Floyd, my question is, would we, if we reverse George Floyd and Daniel Shaver, or an even more accurate version would be this Tony Timpa killing in Dallas, which I think happened in 2016 as well as Daniel Shaver. My question is, would we unquestionably say that the Dallas killing and the Arizona killing would have been racially motivated had George Floyd happened to have been interchanged? And would we be ignoring what happened in Minneapolis? That is what a scientist does. A scientist examines hypotheses and questions. And I just saw a notice go out to the alumni of Caltech saying that we had to eliminate anyone who still resisted these measures to increase this awareness of our terrible bigotry. And quite honestly, the key problem that we're facing here is that we are all, for some reason, terrified of telling the black community, you're wrong. The black community that is behind Black Lives Matter is frequently wrong. And the idea that we can't talk to people as equals and tell them when they're wrong and explain and run controlled tests and try to talk about inference patterns, when we know that there's prejudice in the system, we know that there's police brutality, but they make terrible arguments. One of the arguments is that no white people are afraid of the police and that only black people can understand what it means to be afraid of police. Can you possibly imagine that that's true after watching the Daniel Shaver and Tony Timpa video? No, you can't. So what do we have today? We have an unusual situation. We have Science Magazine and Nature, for example, who've signed on. Nature runs a picture that says Black Lives Matter. That's not saying that black lives actually matter, which is obvious and doesn't require comment. It's saying Black Lives Matter, both the organization and the point, all right? So that's what we would call an overloaded statement in computer science, right? It means more than one thing at the same time. So now Science and Nature are behind this. And now what we have, right, is that if you contradict this, then it must mean that you don't think Black Lives Matter. Well, that's not how science works. And that's why we have terms like overloaded, where one thing means multiple things. And that's why we have controlled trials. And what you have today is a beautiful example where you have something where all of us care about a murder of a man in broad daylight, even if he was a convicted felon and not particularly a good person who did not necessarily see black lives as mattering because he may have engaged in violence towards black people. But we all care, and we all, you know, our black people matter to us just as our white people and our Asian people and our Native American people. And there are people who are more screwed over than even many black people. It's enough. It's incredibly important that everybody in a free society be able to interact as equals. And when Jews are wrong, you have to be able to say, hey, Jews, you're wrong. When whites are wrong, when women are wrong, we have to be able to say women are wrong. This idea that this concept of I am more oppressed, therefore I am more correct, and my lived experience is not understandable by any other person other than me. We're going to have to tackle this bull head on. There is nothing I want less than to tell the least advantaged person, a person sold into slavery as a child, sexual slavery, crippled, a person who has known only deprivation. I don't want to have to tell that person, you're wrong. But if that person says that 2 times 3 equals a chicken, that person is wrong. I don't care how trans they are. We have to have the ability inside of a free society to treat each other reverently as equals. And part of being an equal is you're wrong. If I can't tell you you're wrong, you're not my equal. And I absolutely believe that you are wrong. And I think that you're my equal, and so I'm going to tell you. Science magazine, you're out of control. Our universities are out of control. Our leaders are out of control. There should, at a minimum, be a large number of people who spent the day researching because they don't understand exactly how we came to this position. I spent the day partially researching, not to make a point of it, but I wasn't going to stop it. And by the way, I have lost relatives who I loved, and I have spent less time grieving them the way people are pretending to grieve over George Floyd. It's a tragic situation, but you didn't know him. What was terrible wasn't George Floyd's death in particular. It was the murderous cop behavior. And the murderous cop behavior is white on white, it's white on black, it's black on white. It happens all over the spectrum. And what I've said before, and I just said it on Brett and Heather's Dark Horse podcast, which I recommend you check out, is that there's a scene in Animal House, and I want you to look at it, where there's a parade and there's a marching band. And the marching band has to follow the guy with the baton. And somebody knocks the guy who's got the baton out of the way and starts picking up the baton and taking the marching band down an alley. We were all in a situation where we were pissed off because of COVID. We had unemployment spiking. People have been dissatisfied across the board. And Black Lives Matter took the baton because of this incredible situation with this vile murder. I mean, I assume it's murder. I don't know what he died of, but my assumption is that it's murder. And in the Animal House, when the marching band goes down the alley, that was all of us. We were all upset about all sorts of things. And now we've got one group pretending that they're in control of everything that's going on. And in fact, the world is really upset. And the reason the world is upset, I was talking about for years. You guys are all bored. I've called it the N-squared revolution. Look it up on the Portal Clips channel. Subscribe there. I mean, this is absolutely preposterous. And okay, so we've lost science, we've lost nature, we've lost the independence of the academy. Everybody's frightened that they're going to get called a bigot. And quite honestly, the people we want in science are the people who aren't frightened, the people who have the courage to stand alone, the people who resist groupthink, group feel, the people who are overthinking it, because that's what we do in science. We think. We don't feel our way through things. That's why it's a counterweight. If you want feelings, by all means, go watch a soap opera. But this is science, and this is not scientific, and quite frankly, what we are doing is performative, it's silly, and I'm going to drop the biggest issue of all. The science establishment fights to make sure that it doesn't have to take extraordinary measures to bring blacks, women, and other minorities into science by using our immigration system, and they've studied this internally at the National Science Foundation, originally in the Policy Research and Analysis Division under Eric Bloch and Peter House in the mid-1980s. Okay? Do you understand what I'm saying? If you want to get women and minorities and everybody else into science, here's what you do. You allow the labor market to work without using visas as labor relief. You start classifying the workers who are in the labs as workers and not calling them students or postdoctoral students. And I've written this up in a paper called How and Why Government, University, and Industry Create Labor Shortages. This is an entire sham, and if those people care so deeply about Black Lives Mattering and about getting black people into STEM, here's what you do. You take the people, you reinstitute mandatory retirement for people who've been in their job for 20 years with very little productivity, okay? And then you cut off the supply of visas so that you can't pay for work by giving people immigration, and you're forced to use the labor market. And then you stop talking about how beautiful it is that science is international, not because it isn't international, but because that is a cover story. So there's a ton to do, and I'm willing to do it. And if you want to really talk about how to bring black lives into science, it would be my pleasure. So if you want to come after me and call me a bigot, I would be so happy to take the National Science Foundation and the National Academy of Sciences on one hell of a Nantucket sleigh ride to point out that they have studied internally how it is that women and minorities come into science, and that they sought to fake a labor shortage in order to get relief so that it didn't have to happen. So, if you want to come after me, Caltech, if you want to come after me, National Science Foundation, if you want to tell me what a bigot I am for doing partial differential equations on a day that I'm supposed to put my pen down for my reverence for my black brothers and sisters, no, I care about my black brothers and sisters one hell of a lot more than you do. Because I've been at this since the 1980s. And if you read my papers and you read my work, you will see that it has been consistent. It's not one day, it's a lifetime commitment. And I've said something else to you, okay? And that is this. The soul of American science is the middle finger. So consider this National Science Foundation, Science Magazine, Nature Magazine as a challenge. My middle finger is pointed straight at you. You're weak, you're cowardly, you don't deserve to be in charge of science. You've jumped the shark, you don't know what you're doing. And if you want to talk about how to get blacks into science, I'm absolutely your guy. Come after me. Understood? Thank you. Love you guys.